Hi there, Michael here. I recently spoke with Jason Hamilton, also known as the Nerdy Novelist, about his innovative use of generative artificial intelligence in creative writing. What makes Jason's perspective so valuable is that he was an established artist before the public emergence of generative artificial intelligence, and he successfully integrated it into his existing artistic process, using it to augment rather than replace his skills. While I initially recorded this conversation for a university assignment for my students, it proved so insightful and thought-provoking that I decided to share it here on my main channel as a bonus video. Although Jason works primarily in fiction writing, his approach is highly relevant to the immersive audio community as well. AI in music production advances rapidly, and audio professionals need to prepare for similar transformations that the writing space has already experienced. Jason's approach shows how to master this transformation successfully. And with that being said, let's turn it over to Jason, the Nerdy Novelist Hamilton. Well, Jason, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. I'm really excited about this little chat. Over the last couple of months, I was heavily involved in researching how artificial intelligence is going to influence the work that I do as an educator at a research university. And in researching this topic, I came across your YouTube channel, and I have to say that whatever you're doing has a huge influence on my thinking, because many of the things that you are approaching are really resonating with what we are currently seeing in creative education and how the creative disciplines are moving. But first of all, for those of whoever is going to see this, and in case they don't know you, can you briefly introduce yourself, your YouTube channel, and essentially what do you do for a living?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jason Hamilton, and my YouTube channel is called The Nerdy Novelist. And it's basically everything you just said. It's a channel all about incorporating AI into creative writing specifically. Most of my audience are fiction writers, a couple of nonfiction people in there as well. But it's all about, long form writing using AI and all of these tools that are available to us. I got started with that because a year ago, I was working for a website called Kindlepreneur. And for those unfamiliar with Kindlepreneur, they're one of the largest resources out there for those who want to learn how to self-publish books. So a lot of people going on Amazon, publishing books there, that sort of thing. So I had a really strong basis in the self-publishing world. I had written and published a few books myself. And a couple of years back, I hit a stage of creative burnout that lasted for a couple of years. And during my time at Kindlepreneur, AI started to gain some traction, and ChatGPT came out, and I started looking into it a little bit more. And the more I got into it, the more excited I became because I was finding myself, ironically, feeling more creative, feeling more inspired, and just kind of ran with that. Created a few videos because I saw most of the people making videos on YouTube had clearly never written a book in their life, and they were just jumping on the AI hype train. And with my experience and my background, I knew that I could talk more intelligently about how to actually write a book, practically, and how to incorporate AI into that process. And I created a few videos, and those took off. And uh, right now, the channel's up to almost 50,000 subscribers. So it's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to make sure that whoever sees this also has a link to your channel. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things that I find fascinating is sort of really your journey as somebody who has actually experienced how to really write a book the traditional way, right?
Hmm.
And what I see in my work is that quite often people who are in these fields active, they are sort of almost a little bit afraid to talk about these things. They kind of are usually very rejecting anything that comes in terms of artificial intelligence. If you, for example, in our Discord server at our department talk to our students or our game design students about artificial intelligence, you're going to start a riot. And the thing that I found interesting is that you essentially you actually, I think you published like 12 books, something like that. before you
Yeah.
got into AI. So,
Mhm.
so, so, um, how did that happen? I mean, you already alluded to it a little bit, kind of in terms of creative burnout and kind of the
Mhm.
fact that it made you a little bit more creative. But was it a difficult kind of thing to get into? What did other people think? Did you find a lot of people were kind of not really happy with the idea that Jason is now going to start using AI as an actual writer? He's sort of no longer one of us. He's kind of
Yeah.
on the other side of the coin.
Well, you definitely always get a small vocal minority of people who are very much against the whole idea and concept. Um, I do get the occasional YouTube comment about how I'm a hack and not a real author and all of these things. But for me, like I said, it was a solution to creative burnout for me, and that alone was enough for me to embrace it. I got started writing again, and these are my stories. It's not just pushing a button and AI comes up with some kind of book, right? It's like I have my vision, and AI is more of a productivity tool to get my vision onto the page. It just does so a little bit more efficiently than typing it, right? Or handwriting it or whatever you do for to write your books. Um, and there has been, I would say, a lot of fear in the author community around AI, and not just the author community, but the artist community. I'm sure the video game and animation side of things are starting to get a little freaked out by it. The music industry is a little freaked out by it because it's a major disruptor, for sure. And there are going to be people like there are going to be people losing their jobs, but there are also going to be people gaining new jobs, and it's just going to be a whole shift in the market. But that said, I do think that people are coming around. There is, I've spoken at a couple of conferences where writers are present talking about AI, and there has been a definite shift in just the energy that people have about AI. I just got back a couple of weeks ago from this one of the biggest self-publishing conferences out in Vegas, and there were tons of speakers there talking about AI. It's starting to get to the point where people know this is the next big thing and we need to talk about it, and it's not going away. And so I think you're always going to have some people that keep their head completely buried in the sand, but I think as a whole, especially if you have a much more abundant mindset and are thinking more in terms of what can this do for me, um, what can what is the opportunity here, rather than thinking about the people that are going to replace you because they're using AI. Um, so I do think there is a shift happening.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and but it's always a little bit of a challenge to convince people, or maybe we don't need to convince them, but sort of to kind of clarify what you really do with it, because there's this perception that AI is just doing all your work, but it's not really the case, right? So you are actually using it as a productivity tool, and I can tell you from my own experience as an academic writer. So I'm not really a fiction writer. I'm writing the driest things that possible. But when I am in front of an empty page, I have a hard time starting. I really do, right? So I have a lot of
Yeah.
ideas in my head, but they never get out on the page. And with AI, essentially what's happening now is that things are just kind of flowing onto the page, and then kind of there's the whole editing process and making sure that everything is okay, and making sure that everything is according to the requirements and everything is ethically. But sort of this tool that lets you get your creative flow going. I
Hmm.
think that is something that a lot of people have not yet realized, that is actually really, really powerful. So yeah, so
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't really realize just how important the human still is to the process and the expertise of the human. So if somebody has experience writing books and being a publisher, or you have like your expertise as a professor, that still matters. It's not like AI is replacing you and replacing those things. It becomes a tool for you to just enhance your own process, right? To get over the blank page syndrome, or um, or whatever it is, right? But AI, at least for now, maybe this will change in the future, but at least for now, AI doesn't really do good work without the careful guidance of an expert. And the more expert you are in the field, whether it's writing or art, the better the output's going to be. Like I know some of the people I know that are succeeding the most in the field of art are the people using AI right now. Like, but they were already artists. So why would they use AI art? Well, because they're an artist, and because they're an artist, they know what to do with what AI gives them in a way that somebody who isn't an artist wouldn't be able to tell you. Um, so
So the fact that you have written a dozen books before you got into AI then is a huge advantage, right? So that's sort of something that gives you a kind of a starting point.
Yeah, and it helps you it helps change the prompts that you're using for AI too, because you have to kind of understand the lingo of writing. You can't just say, "Hey, write this scene," and it won't and have it do a good job. Like you have to know what makes a good scene, what does show don't tell mean, all of these terms and knowledge that you learn over time from being an author. All of that is still plays a part.
In one of your videos, and that was actually one of the videos that kind of resonated with me the most, you talked about you have to work harder and smarter. I think you said smarter and harder, one of the two, instead of smarter, because in the AI community, right? So there's this social romantic kind of idea that we now have AI and we don't have to work anymore. We're on the beach and we have our AI agents do all the work. But that's actually not really what's happening. And I think you expressed that really, really well. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of working harder and smarter, or smarter and harder? Sorry if I kind of did that wrong.
So we've all heard the phrase "work smarter, not harder." And I think that's good advice most of the time. You could cut your lawn with a pair of scissors, but that would not really be a good way to do it, right? You should ideally use a lawnmower, right, to mow your lawn. And so it's always good to find the ways to work smarter and not harder. And AI is a massive way to work smarter, not harder, because you can do the same things that you were doing already, and it will take less work, less time, less mental energy, whatever it is. And you're right. Like some people think, oh, well, now I can just sit back and relax and have more time and make more money because I'm producing more books or what have you. But really, because everybody has access to these tools now, if you're being, for lack of a better term, lazy with them and trying to just pump out a bunch of books without putting in any work, that's not going to do well either because everybody has these tools. So we're all like equal now. On the flip side, if you're not using these tools, there's a good chance you might be left behind because you're not going to be able to keep up. And this is true of any technology, by the way. This isn't just AI. AI is a good example because it's really rapid in its development, but like the internet, smartphones, all of these things, you could say the same because just technology advances and we need to be taking advantage of that as it advances. So I always tell people like we need to work smarter and harder. And what that means is use these tools, use AI, and still work hard, you know? Because there's always going to be somebody out there who is doing that, who is using the tools and working hard, working smarter and harder, and you're not going to be able to compete with that person unless you're doing the same thing. Hard work is still very, very important, and um, it will be most effective when you're also working smarter. I feel like when we do work smarter and harder, we're going to not only be able to survive in an AI saturated world, but we will also be able to do things that we would never have been able to do before, if that makes sense. Like for instance, right now it's been possible to translate a book into other languages, but it's very expensive. And these days with AI, now granted it's not perfect at this yet, but uh, it's now possible to translate your books into practically every language and affordable to do that. And we're not necessarily taking jobs away from translators, because we would never have hired a translator in the first place because we didn't have the money. But with AI, you can at least get most of the way there. Maybe you'll hire a proofreader, so someone is still getting money, and that way they can look through the book and make sure that the translation's accurate and everything. But like, think of the world where in the past, just a select few books, the lucky ones that make a lot of money, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, all these books, those get translated into a lot of different languages. But everybody else is out of luck. So imagine a world where every book is available in every language, and you've then opened up the entire world market from that. And that's something that just would not have been possible before, and it's now possible. So I think that's what we need to be looking at. Like, what is possible now that we couldn't have done before? So we're not replacing artists. We are going to places that artists have never been able to go to before, because we're using these tools smarter and harder.
It's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting that you bring up the translation thing, because I mean, you probably don't know, but in my channel has a lot of viewers from India for whatever reason, and so for a while I actually translated my subtitles to Hindi with ChatGPT. I stopped doing that because I honestly can't even read the script, so it's kind of, you never quite know. I just have one Indian friend who kind of just looked over it and said, "Yeah, that's okay," but you cannot be 100% sure. But sort of it's true. It's something that would not have been possible only a couple of months ago, and it is a huge deal that now we are able to do that. Now with the working smarter and harder thing is also something that I see in my classes at the university. So essentially, when we have classes where we allow students to use AI tools, and we usually do, because quite frankly, in our field, that's going to become the norm when they go out into the real world. I see sort of those students that are refusing to use AI as falling behind. They're falling behind not necessarily because they can't do the work in the same quality, but it's just because if you, as you said, if you have the ability, or if you have the willingness to kind of integrate AI into your workflow, you can actually achieve much more than you were not able to achieve before. And kind of the quality of the work might be similar, but sort of it's just much more, right? So the level, the type of games that I got in my game design class from students that were using AI were just kind of significantly more polished and more developed than the others, because essentially they had all these productivity tools.
That's really cool. That reminds me of, I was recently having a conversation with one of my old professors who just retired recently. And we were talking about AI, and he said, like, back in the day, he remembers having a debate with the department about whether or not they should allow spell checkers uh, for people submitting their assignments. And now, of course, we would laugh at that, because of course you're going to let students use spell checkers when they're doing their papers. Um, I guess spelling was something that was important to people early on, back before we had spell checkers. But now, unless you're taking like a spelling class or something, where that's the whole point of the class, of course, we're going to let students use spell checkers. And you could also liken it to like using a calculator in a math class, right? There are going to be times when you have like a test where you're supposed to do everything long form without a calculator, but also calculators are very useful, and we use them all the time, both in academia and out. And so I think, I'm not in academia anymore, but I do think we need to rethink things a little bit in terms of like, okay, if everybody is using AI to write their essays, like in the future, in the not too distant future, what then should we focus on in terms of teaching? Is it going to be less about the quality of the writing? Because with the AI, the quality of the writing can be quite good. Do we focus more on the structure of the argument, or the research that went into it, or whatever it is, higher level thinking, I guess? And occasionally you can have classes that are focusing more on like the actual craft of writing. And I think for those kind of classes, you're going to have to rely more on things like handwritten essays and stuff like that that are done in class, because it's going to be next to impossible to fully screen out AI, yeah, at least for writing. It's somewhat recognizable now, but give it another year, it's going to be very difficult to be able to detect. Already, the AI detectors are notoriously awful. Lots of false and or lots of false positives, and just doesn't get it right. So
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you kind of talked about that I probably want to come back to a little bit later, or let's maybe kind of jump right into it, right? So in and this is actually a really big discussion that we're currently having in the creative writing disciplines. Now, I have to kind of preface that I'm not really our department isn't really doing creative writing, so that's a different college and
yeah, that's just my background.
different people. But from my work at the university, I do know that these folks are really kind of struggling to figure out what to do, right? So how would education look like in the future?
Yeah, like think of it this way. Just imagine if we woke up in the future, and we've always had these tools, or at least as far back as we can imagine. What would we then be doing? What would we then be teaching? If we've always had these tools at our disposal, a lot of the time we teach people how to create these things, how to write an essay, how to, I don't know, create a model in Blender. I don't know exactly what you guys do, but uh, how to draw a piece of art digitally. And while I think there's still value in teaching those basic skills that AI can now do easily, I think we should also be thinking higher level. Like, what would we do if nobody did those things and we all just used AI for those? Like, what then is the next level that we're teaching? Right. I think we're going to be thinking more in terms of like higher level strategy, higher level, more nuanced uh, instruction. So it's not, because somebody can use AI and not know what they're doing and produce a bunch of like generic stuff that isn't really good. But I can tell you, like, some of the best AI art comes from people who were already designers, right? Uh, so I think that means that there's other skills that those people picked up somewhere along the way, and those are the skills that we need to be teaching to people, because the actual mechanical act of painting something or of writing something is going to be going away, I think, long term.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with that, and kind of that honestly that scares a lot of people.
yeah,
But I would fully agree. I had a discussion with one of my colleagues from the creative writing department. At well, it's the English department, but they do creative writing. Um, and we came to the conclusion that at some point a writing intensive class might actually be primarily a discussion class, because what you're really doing is you're kind of talking about why you did certain things, how the way you did them, and that is a complete departure of the way these classes are graded right now, because at the moment essentially the whatever the students is producing is the thing that they are grading on. But in the future, that might no longer be possible, because we can no longer reliably detect if that is actually written by the student or by an artificial
yeah,
intelligence. So kind of the discussion, the reflection about something is actually going to become more and more important.
yeah. And I think I can speak to the writing side of things. Working with AI as a writer is a little closer to being an editor than a writer, because there's more involved in editing the AI to be good. Because what it gives you up front is usually not good. So there's there's also new skills involved there, like prompt engineering. That's like a totally new skill. And so you can have a good editor who can take a story and make it amazing, and who has never written a book before. And so I think you can have AI writers who are able to take what the AI gives them and create a masterful story with it. masterful piece of writing without having actually written that book or written any books in the past. Like I think we're eventually going to get to a point where the craft of writing or whatever it is that we're talking about is almost a lost art. There will always be some people that specialize in certain things, but it will be something that is just so commonly used. Like the AI is so commonly used that we're going to develop new skills of probably a combination of prompt engineering with like editing skills in the case of writing um, to uh, to take it to the next level without actually having learned writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's I fully agree with that, and then kind of we also see that in academia in research, for example, right? So it becomes more, as you said, an editing kind of activity, really, or kind of in music production, it's really more a production kind of. You're no longer kind of playing the instrument, not for the production itself.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's a different, and we might actually get to that a little bit later in the discussion. But for the production part, it's no longer kind of playing the synthesizer. It's really kind of instructing the AI what to do, and
Yeah.
and and kind of really kind of falling into the role of a producer rather than an engineer or kind of a composer, which I find interesting. Now, when getting back to the working harder and smarter thing, smarter and harder. I,
Yeah.
um, obviously, if everybody, and that's something that I think that a lot of people struggle because everybody has access to these tools, right? So everybody is now a writer, everybody is now a graphic designer, everybody is now a music producer. Obviously, that means that the business models need to change. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you approach that, because that was the other thing that kind of struck me as something super interesting, is the way you kind of are trying to get into a membership model. So can you talk
Hmm.
a little bit about that? Because, kind of it's sort of really a question of if you have like more books than people can ever read, right? So each individual book becomes less and less valuable, but where
Yes.
where actually is the value? So how do you actually create value in the future where there are more books than people? And
uh,
how do you do that? And you have a very interesting approach to that, I think.
so I have my theories and I have my projects and things that I'm experimenting with. I would not say I mean, this is one of those areas that's completely in flux. Like we don't know how everything's going to turn out, right? But I have a few thoughts on this. Um, Firstly, I think that the simple act of like it used to be one of the most successful publishing pathways that you could do, at least in the self-publishing realm, is to publish a lot of books quickly. So there are a handful of authors, not many could do this, but there are a handful of authors that would write a book a month. And then there are other authors, if they had the money, they could write a few books themselves and also hire people to ghostwrite books, and then they could do a book a month. But that was the idea. You get it out fast and you have enough books, and with all of those books, then you can make a living as a writer. That was the idea. Now with AI, I think we are reaching a point where being able to publish quickly is not useful. It's not important anymore. It's not special. And I disagree with other people that I know in this field. I think they're talking about how it's important to have publishing houses and to be thinking of yourself as a publisher of dozens and dozens of books per year. And to really go and when you find a niche that's sort of underserved, to just like flood it with books, and you'll make money from all of those books collectively. Um, I disagree with that because I think eventually we're going to get to a point where AI can write a good, coherent book that matches your vision very, very quickly. As quickly as you can explain the vision to the AI, it will be able to create something that more or less matches that vision. And so I don't think writing fast is going to be able to work really well. And the same could probably be said of other fields that AI is affecting. So the reason why I created a YouTube channel where people see my face is actually because I believe that in the age of AI, human connection is going to be more important than ever. Um, and so the business that I set up, which is a business for authors who want to learn more about writing with AI, but also more about writing in general and publishing as well, it is a community-based business, meaning it's all about the interactions between the people. I do produce some content for it, but I go live weekly inside of the membership, so people can ask me questions directly. We can have discussions, that kind of thing. Something AI can't do. AI can't have human relationships, right? It can mimic them sometimes, but it can't have real human relationships, and it never will be able to do that, right? And that's maybe a good thing to look at is what are things that AI will never be able to do. One of those is human relationships. And so for that reason, I established this business. It's a community-based business, and I'm currently in the process of building a very similar business model for my fiction audience, where instead of thinking of books as a e-commerce business, which is how they're traditionally treated, um, looking at it more as a community business or interact with readers in a certain genre that like a certain type of thing, and the books are almost afterthought, or their marketing material for the community business, and then the money is made in the community, not in the sales of the books, because books are already a really low ticket product anyway. Like I could go on about, I could go on and on about business models and things and how books are not a really effective business model, as business models go. And I've had a lot of success with this community business on the AI for authors side of things, and so I'm hopeful that I'll be able to replicate the same success for readers. But it is going to have to be quite a bit different. The audience is quite a bit different, and and that's in the process of happening right now. But it'll probably be another month or two before I fully launch that. But I'm hopeful, and I really do believe that human connection is going to matter more than anything in the upcoming years. And so you can still create content with AI, but in the interest of like working smarter and harder, what can you do in addition to just writing books that couldn't have been done before? One of those things I think is, if you're saving all this time writing books, you have more time to interact with the community and to do other cool things, meetups and um, other types of content besides books and you know whatever it ends up being. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I very recently kind of published like an academic paper where I talked about the switch to process-oriented kind of business models, really, rather than so the whatever you're producing is no longer the main value. It's really kind of the process that kind of produces the thing, that artifact. And kind of ironically, in music, that's already happening and has been happening for a long time, right? So musicians don't make most of their money by selling through Spotify. They make their money by kind of playing concerts and kind of having tours and kind of being in touch with the people. And, for humans, there will always be the need to have this human connection to the actual person who plays that guitar on stage, right? The thing that
Right.
kind of for me was missing is kind of an idea on how you would translate that very same concept into other creative fields like a creative writing. And you were actually the first one where I saw that idea. I think that is astonishingly kind of forward thinking. The idea to really kind of use this more as a kind of a community-based business that really kind of values the connection, right? I think in some
Yeah.
of the videos you said, I mean, you could technically kind of pump out like a book in a couple of days.
Yeah.
But first of all, that devalues the books. So the books themselves no longer become kind of valuable. But what you really want to do is kind of establish that connection to your readers. So that and that to me also is a little bit of a kind of a something that kind of informs each other, right? So kind of the
Mhm.
your community will also kind of tell you what direction your books should go, right?
Right, yeah, there's definitely some feedback there that you get.
So it's almost
I
like, yeah, it's almost like a world building kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think you could there's some interesting things you could do there, and AI could even help you, like, for instance, what if you had like a book that you or maybe a custom short story for every fan, you know? Wouldn't be that hard to do, with the way technology's going. So, like, something like that could be really interesting. There's just things that would never like, there's no way you could create a short story for a bunch of people, just for them, right? But with AI, maybe now you can.
So essentially the your members in that and you write a particular type of fiction, so you have your own universe, right? So
Yes, and that's the other thing, like, I do think we need to think a little bit in terms of intellectual property instead of just books. Like, a lot of authors out there, they think in terms of what niche is underserved, and they go write a bunch of books that fill that niche. For me, and this is more common in fantasy and science fiction, but I like to make sure everything's connected. So all my book series are part of the same universe, just different eras or different time periods or different characters. And so I think that would help with um, this sort of overwhelm of books, right? If it's all connected, you kind of like track it all, and yeah, I think it that can help as well.
so essentially the your members become almost part of that universe, right? So
Hmm.
I think kind of um, you are really on the right way in my personal opinion. So that is kind of how things are
Let's
developing.
hope so.
I have not seen many people kind of going that route. Once again, kind of in certain disciplines that is common. Once again, musicians do that all the time, right? But not necessarily authors, and not necessarily, for example, the type of fields that we are teaching. Kind of in game design, certainly this as well. Sometimes, kind of there are certain areas, there are certain smaller studios that do that, but not on a larger scale. So that is super interesting. Now, when it
Yeah.
comes to do you have any? Yeah, a lot of people are very concerned about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Do you have any kind of concerns about that? I mean, you kind of obviously everything is out there, right? So essentially, who is everybody could technically take all your books and then kind of turn that into their own universe, and in reality, it's your universe, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one, honestly. Well, there are things that I consider to be completely unethical. For instance, if somebody took my book and used AI to rewrite it and change all the names and then publish that as a new book, that's possible. It would be next to impossible to identify when that has happened. Like, Amazon wouldn't be able to tell that it's plagiarism. Maybe if you have a loyal reader who reads both would recognize the similarities. But even then, if you're prompting the AI well, you could change it enough that even then they might not tell. It just would be a story with a similar story structure, but everything else would feel more or less the same. That I would consider unethical, and I don't know what to do about it. That's one of those things I thought through, and I'm just like, I don't know what the solution to that is. Um, Other than, again, establishing that interpersonal relationship with readers so that they're buying your stuff and potentially only buying your stuff from you, right? Like, maybe you're not on Amazon, maybe you have your own store and that's the only way to get your stuff. I don't know. But when it comes to the ethics of like training these AI models on your books, which they have been doing, um, there is currently no law that prevents them from doing that, because from all analyses that I've seen, it comes out as fair use. And the reason for that, and there was just recently a lawsuit that was dropped recently, and the judge gave a reason, and it was because the plaintiffs were not able to provide evidence of harm. Because when you are training a model on books, every book is like a grain of sand in a beach, right? It's very hard, if not impossible, to accidentally plagiarize someone's work using AI. It's just taking all of its knowledge and creating something new from all of that, kind of how humans work. Um, and what it creates is transformative. And if it's transformative, it's really hard for the law to say that anything bad has occurred. If it created something that was very clearly derivative from somebody's intellectual property, then that could maybe be cause for concern. But it's almost always a transformative process. So the output is different, significantly different. And so they can't really prosecute that. People have been trying, and they've been like, none of the lawsuits have been holding up in court. Um, Now, do I think that the fair use laws could change? Possibly, but they'd have to essentially lobby for it rather than decide it in the courts, right? But yeah, that's one of the tough questions, right? Because it doesn't feel right, right? It doesn't feel right that they took my books without my permission and created this tool. But really, like I said, it's a grain of sand in a large beach, and it represents such a small fraction of everything that they're training on. And given the fact that it's transformative, I just don't see a good argument going in that in favor of creatives in this particular space. And also, if you look at big companies like Disney, who's a good example, um, all of these models have clearly been trained on Disney's material. Um, you can ask Midjourney for an image of Mickey Mouse, and it'll give it to you right away. So it's clearly been trained on Disney's stuff. Disney and all of these other big intellectual property companies, publishers, and like film studios, none of them have sued anybody. And to me, that's a big sign that these companies with their massive legal teams decided it was not going to be effective to sue Midjourney, these tiny companies by comparison, or OpenAI or any of these others. Like, the fact that they haven't done that is evidence to me that there's not a good legal case for it, and likely never will be. I think people are still holding on to that possibility in the hopes that it will squash AI in its tracks, and we'll all be free from this whole thing. But as time goes on, I think people are, like I said earlier, people are coming around to the fact that AI isn't going away. So we'll see.
Yeah, the way I look at it is also that kind of, it's not only the United States who are developing these models, right? So there are a lot of very capable models coming out of China. And even if the US would regulate, and by the way, fair use is a very US-centric kind of view, right? So other countries don't have that at all. But even there, it's not really kind of, there is no reason to believe that anybody is going to sue anybody.
Right.
And the reason for that is simply because everything is in the open. Many of these models are open source. The US is in a race with China for the best model. They are not going to regulate each other. That's just not going to happen. So in the end, I think, and I'm coming back to what your idea of a business model is. I think in the end, the artifact that you're producing, the outcome, is probably going to be reduced in its value to practically nothing. And what is left is really the connection that you establish with your audience. It's sort of this human connection that becomes the thing. And that is a transformational process that I think a lot of people, quite frankly, also don't want to go into, because I would think that a lot of authors like the solitude. But in the end, it becomes, being an author probably becomes almost like a performance art. Where you essentially have to be in contact with your audience. if you would be an educator, what would you do? Kind of, if you would kind of have the chance to create a creative writing program, what would you do in order to make sure that your students are well prepared for artificial intelligence?
I mean, that's kind of essentially what I've done in my membership is I've created a program to learn, not just learn about AI, but learn about the qualities of good storytelling. Um, I think if I were to create like an academic program, it would probably follow similar lines. But instead of learning how to write by writing, it would be the focus would be on learning how to write with AI, and then once you have the AI written text, it would be all about learning how to modify that text to be even better. So it'd be more of an editing, like being from an editor's point of view, as opposed to a writer's point of view. It's a different process, and you're learning some new skills. Some of which have been around for a while. Editing skills have been around for a while, but some of which are new, like prompt engineering, and combining those in interesting, creative ways to produce something new. And then I think I'd talk about a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today, like what does the future look like in an AI world, and how should we go about it? Because we can't afford to think the way we've been thinking in terms of producing books and publishing them and making money off of books. That the old way of thinking there is soon to be gone completely, and we need to be thinking in different terms, I think.
Coming back to the very beginning where we talked, and kind of that almost kind of is closes the loop, but I think I've seen in some of your videos that you have like a custom GPT, which is called Make It JSON, something like that, right? So kind of the fact that you wrote books in the past allowed you to train a model to kind of formulate things the way you would formulate that, right?
Yeah.
But that is an advantage that we have as sort of people that are moving into the AI space. In the future, that might no longer be the case because there might be people who have never written a book, right? So what is their Make It JSON going to be? Do you see an issue there? Kind of, are we maybe kind of really at a very advantageous position, given that we have this classical training and now can take all the things that we did in the past in order to feed that into an AI that is doing the work for us? Is this something that future generations are no longer going to have this advantage? What are they going to do?
To a certain extent, yes. I think having those skills is an advantage, and an advantage that not everybody will have. But however, I do think that you can kind of what I said about learning new skills that are like editing skills. I think you can take an AI written chapter, an AI written book, and turn it into something that's much better than what the AI itself gave you. And then you can just use that to fine tune models or to, give the AI examples of what you're looking for. And that will probably help to make it work because um, there is a problem with AI being trained on itself, right? There's a sort of degradation that happens when that happens. But if you've really done your due diligence to take what AI gave you and make it shine and polish it, that I'm not worried about. You can absolutely use that, I think. And people often do, like when they're writing a book, you can only write in chunks most of the time. And so what people will often do is they'll write a little bit, they'll kind of fix it up as they go, make sure that it follows the plot line, make sure that the writing is higher quality, and then they'll move on to the next section. And as they're writing the next section, they'll include the previous section as an example of what just came before, so the AI can continue writing. And usually what that does, at least with some of the more advanced models, is it's able to continue writing in a similar style. And then you just keep editing it as you go, and it just gets better and better.
So future generations will be able to do that as well. That's kind of that's very exciting. Now I want to be mindful of your time. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of say that we did not cover?
No, I think we covered all of my favorite topics. I love philosophizing about the future and where this is all going.
Well, I mean, thanks again for kind of being a good sport and kind of coming on this little chat. I enjoyed it immensely. And anybody who wants to know how the future is going to turn out for creative writing with AI should definitely follow the Nerdy Novelist. My provost is already a little bit annoyed because I'm kind of mentioning you constantly, and good stuff. And I'm really looking
Thank you.
forward
I
to your
appreciate that.
business model and how that works out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's everything for today. If you have enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a like and consider subscribing. On this channel, I primarily talk about immersive audio, but more and more of my videos have content related to artificial intelligence. And if you are only interested in AI, you can also subscribe to my Substack, The Augmented Educator, where I post content that is focused exclusively on the use of AI in education. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. And with that being said, I'll see you all in the next video.